Any president's judicial nominees should receive careful consideration, but after the debate, they deserve a simple up or down vote. Despite the Democrats' power grab, we've offered them several compromises that allow for extended debate, but still give nominees the courtesy of an up or down vote. They've rejected every one. For instance, in May of 2003, the majority leader, along with Senator Zell Miller of Georgia, a Democrat, proposed S-Res 138, the Frist-Miller cloture reform proposal. The Frist-Miller proposal was narrowly tailored after a much broader Democratic proposal from 10 years ago that would have completely eliminated the filibuster in its entirety. The Democrats' proposal would have eliminated filibuster for legislation in which it has historically, to which it's been historically confined, as well as for judicial nominations where it had not been used until the last Congress. Interestingly, all Republicans, every single one, voted against the Democratic proposal because it would have eliminated the legislative filibuster. In fact, it was the first vote that Majority Leader Frist cast here in the Senate. The only senators who voted for that proposal were our friends on the other side of the aisle, 9 of whom are still serving in this body today, singing a different tune, I might add. I have heard several of my friends on the other side of the aisle warn ominously that if the Senate votes to reestablish the norms and traditions of this body with respect to judicial nominations, this could somehow lead to the infringement or even abolishment of the filibuster as applied to legislation. What nonsense. That won't happen because certainly nobody on this side is in favor of it, and I gather now nobody on the other side is in favor of it, even though 19 of them were for it 10 years ago. When the Democrats proposed to do away with the legislative filibuster 10 years ago, nobody on this side of the aisle supported it, and I'm confident nobody on this side of the aisle would today. What's remarkable about that, Mr. President, is back in '95, when our friends on the other side were proposing eliminating the filibuster, it was right after our party came to the majority. We'd have been the big beneficiary of that had it passed, but yet not a single one of us voted for it. What did we do? We exercised restraint. So back to the Frist-Miller proposal, which, as I said, was a narrowly focused version of the Democratic, I stress Democratic, bill to eliminate the filibuster altogether. The Frist-Miller proposal was much more moderate, much more measured. It would have applied only to nominations, not to legislation. It would have allowed senators, after 12 hours of debate, to file successive cloture petitions with declining requirements to achieve cloture. The final cloture threshold would be a majority of senators present and voting. The Frist-Miller proposal would have allowed the minority sufficient time for debate while reestablishing the Senate's 214-year history of allowing nominees with majority support to receive the courtesy of an up or down vote. It was a good proposal. Unfortunately, our Democratic colleagues rejected it. In April 2004, it's a little over a year ago, the majority again reached out to our Democratic colleagues. We suggested another approach to break this impasse on judicial nominations. This time, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Specter, took the lead by offering S-Res 327, the Specter Protocol. Under the Specter Protocol, judicial nominees would receive a committee hearing, a committee vote, and a floor vote within a reasonable amount of time, regardless of which party controlled the Senate and the White House. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee would agree to hold hearings for the nominees within 30 days of the submission of their names by the president. The chairman would set a date for the full committee to vote within 30 days of those hearings. And the majority leader would set an up or down vote on the Senate floor within 30 days after a nominee was reported out of committee. Pretty simple. As I indicated, these timetables would apply whether Democrats or Republicans were in charge of the Senate, whether the same party controlled the White House and the Senate, or whether the two parties split control. I bet that to the vast majority of people listening, that sounds like an extremely fair bipartisan solution. I agree with that. Again, unfortunately, our Democratic friends have not embraced it. At this point, most people would throw up their hands and give up. We don't have the luxury of doing that, however, because the American people elected all of us to act on these issues that confront the country. Restoring Senate tradition and thereby restoring the proper balance of power between the executive and legislative branch is one of our responsibilities, and we need to do it. So we Republicans redoubled our efforts and patiently tried again. In the interim, though, we had an election. President Bush and several candidates for the United States Senate, many of whom serve here today, met thousands of mainstream, ordinary Americans who were angry at the obstructive attempts to disfigure the filibuster. Thousands of Americans told President Bush and their Republican candidates for the Senate that they don't believe the President's nominees are out of the mainstream, and they don't like a minority of the Senate preventing the Senate from discharging its constitutional duty. Millions of them turned out to re-elect President Bush, giving him more votes than any presidential candidate in American history, and millions voted to increase the majority's number in this body from 51 to 55. Given those results, many of us had hoped that the politics of obstruction would have been dumped in the dustbin of history.